Hi, my name's Cheese, and welcome to another Fossil Sweeper Progress Update video. If you haven't heard of the project before, you can find an overview here, but the TLDR is, it's like Minesweeper, but you're digging up fossils, and you get to build skeletons out of the stuff you find. Over the past month or so, I've continued working on chat integration. October has been another relatively busy month on non-Fossil Sweeper fronts, so I've continued to tinker with chat integration stuff. My quick and dirty first pass grid coordinate labels ended up being very sluggish on large dig sites. Unproject position is a little heavy, and in addition to doing it unnecessarily for off-screen labels that don't need to be visible, I was also doing a lot of redundant calculation to check and see if off-screen things needed positioning. The approach I'm using makes use of 2D labels and positions them to match locations in 3D space depending upon the camera's position. This is how I did the speech bubbles, interaction menus, and so on in Hivetime, and I think it's the direction that makes the most amount of sense here too. It works well enough for medium-sized digs where dimensions aren't likely to exceed 16 by 16 or 64 labels, but for huge dig sites, which can be upwards of 64 by 64, there are over 180 labels created, even though you're not generally going to see more than 64 at once. Initially I was doing a check for each one's unprojected position to see if it's on screen, and then determining whether or not it needed to be visible on the edge of the screen. Anything diagonally off screen doesn't need to be shown, but anything in line with the boundaries needs to be brought to the edge of the window so that coordinates can be seen when zoomed in. After projecting the viewport bounds once, and comparing that to the label's 3D coordinates before unprojecting, I was able to get things a little faster. But it also turned out that all that could happen multiple times per process tick, so I added a should update coordinate labels flag and call update coordinate labels from the process function once per tick when the flag is true. Another hurdle I had to cross was what happens if the label's 3D coordinates end up behind the camera. The unproject position function will flip the resulting position for anything that is behind the camera, taking into account the camera's rotation. This ends up meaning that it doesn't get processed correctly by my move off-screen labels to the Windows Edge calculations. I spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to do a quick, naive solution that flipped the forward axis of the labels behind the camera and did two unprojects near each other, and then lerped between those with an amount greater than 1 to coerce them to the edge of the window. It was cumbersome and messy, and as soon as I stepped out for a walk, I realized I could just replace the coordinates forward axis with the forward axis of the camera's global transform, and that would guarantee that it was in front of the camera, while also being outside of the viewport frostum, which would allow it to be properly handled by my normal move off-screen label stuff. The results still need some presentation work, particularly when zoomed out far enough that multi-character labels can overlap, but it's snappy enough that I'll be comfortable shipping this in test builds for now. I've also reworked chat commands to be placed in a queue that the player can review and accept or reject, rather than having them immediately processed. I'll add an option to make them auto-process on a timeout at some point so that I can bring back that chat playing without a player functionality in the future, but it's better to implement that on top of staged or queued actions than maintain two separate implementations, I think. A very big thank you to the supporters going by on screen at the moment. Their support has helped me eat while making this game, and I am so very appreciative. A huge thanks also to Screen Tasmania, who supported this project with a small grant. Anyway, that's about it for today. If you'd like to keep track of development or try the playable prototype, you can find some links in the description. And if you're super keen to check out what we talked about here today, I make early test builds available to my supporters on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and goodbye!